it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Hi folks, it's Chris Gregory here and welcome to Bob Dylan, a head full of ideas. We're now on season 3 and this is episode 17, Motorpsycho Nitemare, a clean-cut kid. This begins with a little quote, and it's from no less than Alfred Hitchcock. The content was, I felt rather amusing and it was a big joke. I was horrified to find some people took it seriously. That's not a very good impression of Alfred Hitchcock. Anyway, Alfred Hitchcock commenting on Psycho, BBC interview 1964. Motorpsycho Nitemare is a comic, shaggy dog story. It appears on what is generally regarded as Dylan's first post-protest album, Another Side of Bob Dylan, from 1964. The song represents a kind of bridge between the comic, political and social commentary of Dylan's early talking blues songs and the surreal landscapes of satirical pieces like Bob Dylan's 115th Dream, Subterranean Homesick Blues, Tombstone Blues and Desolation Row. This is also the first Dylan song to show a strong cinematic influence, a tendency which will come to the fore in the songs on the Desire album and in many of his later songs, really. Only 2 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, various elements of the Cold War, such as the CIA's attempt to discredit or kill Cuban revolutionary leader Fidel Castro, including rather insanely and absurdly poisoning his cigars and using thallium salts to make his famous beard fall out. These kind of things were already seen as being rather ridiculous. Earlier in the year, Stanley Kubrick's brilliant, absolutely fantastic black comedy Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, a devastating attack on the mentality behind the nuclear standoff, had been released, revealing that only through comic exaggeration could that mentality be confronted in any kind of effective way. Apart from perhaps Chimes of Freedom, with its more generalised sentiments, it's the only song on the album which refers directly to contemporary political matters. Like the earlier Talking John Birch Society blues, it satirises rabid conservative anti-communist paranoia, but in a rather less obvious and more freewheeling manner. The song also marks Dylan's first developed demonstration of the influence of contemporary cinema in his work, as he weaves elements of Hitchcock's Psycho and Fellini's La Dolce Vita, both released in 1960, into a narrative that appears to follow the pattern of farmers' daughters stories. Such stories, which often featured in comedians' stand-up routines, tend towards vulgarity, and usually feature stock characters, a travelling salesman, a sexually inviting daughter, and an irate farmer. In most cases, the farmer tells the salesman he can stay the night as long as he doesn't touch his daughter. Mayhem naturally follows. The song has 9 verses, each one consisting of 3 rhyming couplets. Dylan uses a basic rhythmic structure. The song conveys its meaning in a fairly obvious way. His ridiculing of the farmer and his crazed anti-communist attitudes provides plenty of funny moments. But the elements that make the song really distinctive are Dylan's use of comical and ironic rhymes and the way he characterises the young narrator who uses cool, beatnik street talk to deliver a series of hilarious evasive manoeuvres. It is perhaps surprising that the song was never performed live in the early acoustic shows, as it could have provided some much-needed light relief from Dylan's heavier works. The narrative begins with a young man desperately knocking on a farmhouse door. He's clearly stranded and he needs somewhere to stay. Then we hear that out comes a farmer. He must have thought that I was nuts. He immediately looked at me and stuck a gun into my guts. The clearly crazed rifle-wielding farmer demands to know if he is that travelling salesman that I've heard about, presumably from those stories, I guess. Our hero has to work hard to pacify him. He gets down on his knees and begs, I dig farmers, don't shoot me, please. In one of the song's funniest couplets, he pleads, "Oh, I'm a doctor and it's true. I'm a clean-cut kid and I've been to college too." We can be sure that he has invented the bit about being a doctor in a desperate attempt to portray himself as respectable. It's highly likely that he is actually a penniless traveller who is looking highly dishevelled. His assertion that he is a clean-cut kid is very dubious, to say the least. Then Rita, the daughter, appears. We're told that she looked like she stepped out of La Dolce Vita. This is one of the kind of rhymes that Dylan enjoys doing, Rita and Vita. He's clearly referring to Anita Ekberg, the very beautiful and extremely well-endowed star of Fellini's surreal movie, a favourite of the arts house crowd in Greenwich Village. Dylan had previously name-checked the actress in I Shall Be Free, one of his early talking blues songs. The narrator now tries to cool it with the farmer by telling him what a nice pretty farm he had. Although, of course, it is really Rita rather than the farm who he finds pretty. The farmer is still suspicious, demanding, "What do doctors know about farms, pray tell?" The narrator shoots back, "I was born at the bottom of a wishing well." Well, you can't argue with that, can you? He finally wins the farmer round and is offered a bed underneath the stove. It doesn't sound very comfortable, does it? On condition that you don't touch my daughter, and in the morning, milk the cows. Well, fair enough. At this point, we may expect that Rita will try to seduce our hapless traveller. She certainly does wake him up, but not in the way he expects. As Dylan sings, "I was sleeping like a rat when I heard something jerking," there stood Rita looking just like Tony Perkins. The rhyme is, of course, very contrived, but it helps to build up the dark humour of the verse. In Psycho, Anthony Perkins portrayed the psychopathic killer Norman Bates, who, after murdering his mother, periodically dresses up like her to murder guests at his motel. One of the most shocking elements of Psycho is that the heroine of the story, Marion Crane, played by Janet Leigh, is actually murdered halfway through the film. This is a bit of a spoiler. I hope whoever's listening to this, you've seen the movie. Anyway, presumably Rita is dressed up like an old lady here, although we are never told this. She merely says, "Would you like to take a shower? I'd show you to the door." At this point, the protagonist, who is clearly all too familiar with the plot of Psycho, reacts in fear. "Oh, no, no," he cries. "I've been through this movie before." Rita, however, ignores him and continues to ask if he wants a shower. The narrator turns to desperate measures. He knows he will have to get the farmer to throw him out to avoid having to milk his cows. "I had to say something to strike him very weird," he tells us. In perhaps the song's funniest lines, he utters the words, "I had to say something to strike him very weird, so I yelled, 'I like Fidel Castro and his beard.'" The farmer charges down the stairs and attacks him. He ducks the blow, but when he sees the farmer reaching for his shotgun again, he prepares to leave. Meanwhile, the farmer throws a copy of the notoriously conservative Reader's Digest at him, shouting, "You aren't patriotic, rotten doctor, commie rat." Rita, meanwhile, in another reference to Psycho, mumbled something about her mother on the hill. Then, in true Hollywood style, the narrator smashes his way through a window and heads off down the road. In a final verse, he tells us, not surprisingly, that "I don't think I'll be back there for a spell," even though Rita moved away and got a job at a motel, as of course she would. Meanwhile, the farmer is apparently still waiting for him with his gun loaded. "He wants to turn me in to the FBI. Finally, he provides us with a quick philosophical reflection on the First Amendment. "May I romp and stomp in, thankful as I romp. Without freedom of speech, I might be in the swamp." The verse has two more Psycho references. Marion Crane is murdered in a motel, and Norman Bates dumps her body in a nearby swamp. The final statement is an especially funny rhyme, indicating both a metaphorical and a real swamp. Despite the way it mocks the extreme views of redneck Americans, Motorpsycho Nitemare cannot really be called a protest song. It's more of a comic burlesque, which uses judicious exaggeration to lampoon the reactionary views of characters like the farmer, to whom Fidel Castro was nothing less than the devil incarnate. That's putting it mildly, perhaps. Significantly, Hitchcock himself stated in a 1964 interview that Psycho was actually meant to be a comedy. It must be borne in mind, however, that Hitchcock, like Dylan, was prone to use interviews to wind up interviewers with deliberately mischievous or controversial statements. But it does seem that Dylan understood that in the movie, Hitchcock was playing a game with the audience by deliberately defying their expectations. Just as Hitchcock continually surprises his audience by placing events in a highly unconventional order, so Dylan's light-hearted attack on reactionary values startles his listeners by heading off on such a left-field track. In doing so, however, he implicitly compares the Reader's Digest mentality of right-wing middle America to the psychotic obsessionalism of a character like Norman Bates. Motorpsycho Nitemare, of course, not one of Dylan's best-known songs, but I find it, personally, one of his funniest. In a lot of ways, it leads up to, as we said earlier, Bob Dylan's 115th Dream on the next album, which goes full on into surreal territory. This is one of the last songs that Dylan ever does that can be called any kind of political satire. After the mid-60s, he tends to drop these kind of songs. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll be back soon. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you. I'll talk to you anyway next time. Bye-bye.
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?